Hello YouTube, my name is Bruno and today we are going to talk about React forms with Formik. By the end of our tutorial, we will achieve this form you see on the screen. With this form, we can create a new bank account in an investment bank. And there are some validation here. For example, if you select high investment risk and you try to submit, you see immediately that the comment is mandatory. But if you select medium, for example, and you try to submit, there is no error for that comment field. This is called cross-validation, and we will do all of that in this tutorial. In order for us to use Formik, we need to import Formik from Formik and then use it. Also, on top of that, we can use form like this or use the form component provided by Formik, and that's what we are going to use. We will import form and Formik to start this tutorial. As we saw in the Formik documentation, I already imported form and Formik. The next step is to start to use Formik, and in order to use Formik, we need to pass initial values to it, which we will declare outside, and we also need to pass a non-submit function that for now we can just pass an empty function. In the future, we will come back to it. The second step that we will need is to grab the context from Formik, and at this stage, we are destructing the context and grabbing values alone from it. So inside, we will declare and use our form. At this stage, we should be able to go to our README, copy these initial values defined there, and just pass them here. Now, we shouldn't have any errors. After that, we can just use a trick that I use a lot of the times when I use with Formik to see the current values of my form. This is probably the easiest possible way for you to see the current state of your form. You are printing all the values and you are formatting them with 4 spaces, which is nice for a JSON file. So if we come here, we will see that at the moment, our form holds the following values: full name, investment risk, comments about investment risk, dependents, and acceptance terms and conditions, with those values by default. The next step is for us to start to use fields. And in order to use a field, we need to pass the name of that field. And those names are the names that we gave as the initial values. So as the first one, we will use full name. And we also need to import this from Formik. So VS Code is not helping us, but we can come here, put field, save, and after we save, we can go to our browser and say, hello world. And as you can see, even with a typo, but as you can see, the full name is here. And it was updated, which means that our initial setup was correct. We can keep going and we can go to the second field. And the second field we have is the initial investment. And this field is slightly different compared to the first one because we want the initial investment to be a number. We don't want someone to just go there and type a character. So we probably can do something at the third stage of this tutorial, but we can also do something now that will help people, for example, in mobile phones. So when you go to a website and they have immediately the numbers from 0 to 9, it's because they are using a value type of number. Oh, not value, sorry, type of number. And if we go back to our browser, we will see that the browser recognizes this is a number and allows us to have those. And in mobile, it looks much better than having a normal text field, even though we can validate afterwards, but it's a nice touch to give the user a number input field. The third stage here is our investment risk. And the investment risk are 3 checkboxes. And we have high risk, medium risk, and low risk. In order to do a checkbox in this field, we need to pass the value of the field we want. And for the first checkbox, the value will be high. And now the last thing we need to say is that the type of this input field is of type checkbox, right? We can copy this 3 times, do one with medium, and do one with low. Saving that and opening our browser, we will have the three checkboxes, even though we don't have any labels. It's probably our next step is to add labels to it. Because now when we click, we can immediately see that we received a high. We also have here a medium, and the last one is a low. So it's working pretty well at the moment. So the next field that we are going to import is the, well, not import, that we are going to use is the component about investment risk, comment about investment risk. So we can come here and say comment about an investment risk. And that one is slightly different than a checkbox, because when we say type equals to checkbox, we are passing that type to an input itself. But in this stage, the text area is a text area itself, is a different component. And Formik, with the field, allows us to pass a as, and this as will render the component we put here. And all the other parameters we pass here, if we do parameters equals to 1, these parameters will be passed to that text area. Okay? So at this stage, we are rendering this text area, and we are connecting this text area to the comment about investment risk, which is pretty good. So if we type hello world, the funny thing is that we can go to the next line, we can type something else, we can go to the next line, and as you can see, every time we go to the next line, we have the /n as you would expect. The last, well, not the last, we still have the accepted terms. We have now dependent. So let's do the dependent. The dependence is different from all of these fields because it will be a drop down or a select, whatever you want to call it. So in order to do a drop down, Formik will allow us to do roughly the same thing we did with the text area, but this time we do a select. And if you ever worked with a select, you know that a select receives some values inside. Oops, not select. I was speaking about select and I typed select. It will receive options, and those options for us, it will be from 0 to 5, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just confirm here in my README. I think we type them up to 5. Yes, 0 to 5 dependents. So we can just copy paste those. 3, 2, 3, 4, 5. I will just speed the video for you. Okay, so now we have all the options from 0 to 5. And as you can see, we used exactly the same trick we used for the text area. We are passing has select. Oops, we have a problem here. I'm still passing the previous name. So let's come, copy dependents. And if you see, I always copy paste these values because sometimes if you have, instead of comment, if you have 3 m's, it will be really hard for you to pick up those problems. So copy pasting sometimes is our friend. Opening our browser, we can see that now the dependents go from 0 to 3, and we can 0 to 5, and selecting 3 shows 3 over here. Okay, and you probably are noticing that we pass 3 as a number here, we pass 3 as a number, but in our browser the options are being recognized as a 3 in quotes. And this is not a problem of Formik itself. This is the implementation of all the browsers that you will use. They implement the options that you pass, they are strings. And when we start to use in the second part of this tutorial Material UI, you will see that Material UI behind the scenes takes care of the numbers, and when we see the dependents on the form, we will have the real number 3. We will not have the string 3, we will have the real number 3. So the last field that we have to do for this part of the tutorial is the accepted terms and conditions. And the accepted terms and conditions is another checkbox. And we just need to come here, copy this value, or this name, sorry. And this checkbox, because it's not multiple checkboxes, it doesn't have a value. This checkbox is only true or false. So it's either checked or not checked. The others are an array of checkboxes. So each one of them, they need to have a value for when you click to be added to the array. In this case, we don't have that property sent anymore. So let's try this. Hello, bye, oops. By the way, it accepted the E because of the exponential, okay? Because you can have exponential of 5 or 10 exponential 5. And if you see, it immediately changes the value here, okay? Because this is a valid notation for numbers to have an exponential. So the next is to click here, we will receive high, medium, and low. Now we say on text area, it's working. We can put dependents as 5 dependents, for example, even though it's still the string, but it's working. And the last input field we have is the checkbox to say if the user accepts the terms and conditions or not. So the first part of our tutorial is finished now. We can even refresh this browser and start to think how we want it to look with material. In order to use material, we will use the same technique we used for asTextArea and asSelect. But this time we will pass a material component, which is the text field. And if you also remember what I said before, any single property that we put here, we will pass to the text field itself. And knowing that the text field in material supports a full name, we can pass that label, and that label will be passed to this text field. So when we go back to our browser, let's just confirm that we imported it. Yes, we did import. We already have our full name, and we can say hello world, and there we go. Our full name is working with material. We can apply exactly the same formula to our second field, just keeping the type equals to number and changing this to investment type. Sorry, not investment type, initial investment. Initial investment. We can save, go back to our browser, wait for the refresh, and now we can try to type some letters. It still doesn't work, but 1, 2, 3, 4 works. We can still use this trick. So everything is working as before. The next step are those checkboxes, but I will show you in a minute why I will not pick them right now, and instead we are going to this text area and this select. Okay, so we can do exactly the same thing here. Text field, and now if I'm not mistaken, it's multi-row or multi-line. I think it's multi-line. We can even not multi-line. I think this is the property in order for material. Yes, it is. Okay, I will just show you here in material. You can come to the documentation in material and type text field. And when you use the text field, we could have well, it's good here. We can do multi-line, okay? And clicking here, you even have examples on how to do a multi-line. If you want to go a bit deeper, you can go to the text field API, and the text field API tells you every single property you can use. And I'm sure multi-line is somewhere, yeah, it's there. By default, it starts as false, and then you can pass a values, and you can also pass rows. You can even pass a rows max. I didn't know that one. So it will only grow up to that number of rows. And in our case, let's say that we will start with 3, and let's use that property rows max equals to 10 rows. Okay, so our text field with a multi-line is also working. We can even come here just to double check, and yes, here it is. Okay, now coming back to our select. Our select, if you see the text here in the text field here in a material, we can go to the text field, and the text field also works with select, okay? Even though we have a different select here on the left. But what we want is something like this. And in order to work, we need to pass a property select to it like that, okay? And so we will do exactly that at the moment. We will come here and we will do text field, select, we will save, but at this moment, it will not look exactly as we expect, okay? So if we click here, it still looks ugly. It doesn't look like material. And the reason is quite simple. Material, instead of using options, in material, we use something called menu item, okay? So let's do the same for these ones. Menu item. And once again, Visual Studio is not importing, so we can go manually and just adding that to our import. Now going back to our page, after it refreshes, we should be able to see a nice looking material drop down. Yeah, this one we like. So now going back to the checkboxes and why I left them a bit behind. If you come here, you will see that the checkboxes, in order to have labels, they need a form control label, okay? And so I will just copy paste an example and show you why it will be a bit trickier. So copy here, copy. We don't need any of those properties. Okay. Okay, so let's just import these. And once again, I will have to do it manually. I need to check what's going on with my VS Code. Let's just import this checkbox as well. And after we save, let's just format this code. And after we save, we can go to our browser again and check that we have this secondary checkbox. Okay. But now we can't pass this as his inside an as like this. Like we can just come here and say has checkbox, because then we will not have our label. So in order to do that, the easiest way is for us to create our custom component that will replace this field. Okay. And so in order to do that, let's create a function. And for now, I will call it my checkbox because I'm not creative with names. And so let's just return this. And as an initial test, let's just see if everything works. So we can just do this. Okay. So let's just see as an initial test if everything works. Our browser is refreshing, so it's over there. So it's working. So now we can go to the Formik documentation and you will see that we have something called Formik. We will have something called useField, and useField is what we are going to use in order to grab the internals of that field. Okay, so let's go to the documentation here, and you will see that that useField will return a field and some metadata. If I'm not mistaken, let's just confirm in a second. And yes, we receive field metadata and some helpers. I'm not even sure what those helpers are. Is to set values. Okay, to set values and probably force validation. Okay, but we can come here and use const field meta. We will not even use meta for now. We don't need that. So use field, and in order to use field, it needs to receive two things at least. Well, one thing is mandatory, which is the name. We don't have yet. We will put here as parameters, but we need a name. We need a type. In this case, it will be checkbox. If we don't say the type, it will assume text by default. And the last thing is the value, because some of our checkboxes, like these three, they have a value. Okay, so we need to inform Formik about those values. This checkbox doesn't have a value, so we will not need for that one, but for the others we will need. So let's just create an interface here, call it my checkbox props, extends checkbox props. Let's just see, import this one just to have autocomplete. Okay, we can come down here and say that one of the things we need is a name, which will be a string. The type already that we have directly, okay? And then we need a value. And in our case, it can be a string or a number. Probably we can have more things, but for now, I will say this is good enough, okay? So we can come here and say name or just props, and we will just spread them. It's just here, okay? So my checkbox props, let's just do props.value, and here we will do props.name. Props.name, it seems good. We also need a label, which will be a string, and we want it mandatory or not. Okay, we can make this one optional, so if people don't want to pass a label, they don't have to. Okay, so let's say that the label will be in here. Label equals to props.label. Okay, and now we can pass the props here, everything there, and we can pass the field. Okay, so having this, now we are passing to our checkbox itself all the properties that we receive. So every single property we pass, we will pass down to our checkbox. And on top of that, we are passing our label to the form control label. So we didn't import this one. We need to import this one, import that one. And now, when we have our my checkbox, we should really give it a better name. But for now, it's just good enough. We can do this, okay? And we can remove that one. We can say label equals to hi. We already have the hi over there, and it's already working, okay? So let's apply to these other two and see how it will look like. So medium, low, and we can even put something else, safe, risky, super risky. Even though in a bank nobody will use this language, but for our demo, probably is good enough. So saving this and going back to our browser, we have our high, medium, and low. We can click and things are still working, okay? So our, oops, I forgot to delete those two. They were still there. So now the last thing we need to do is to do our last checkbox. Let's do our last checkbox, which has the name of accept the terms and conditions, and we can finally have a label to our checkbox. So accept terms and conditions. We can delete these now. Let's just check if I put the value as optional. Now it is optional, because for this checkbox it needs to be optional, and that's why telling here. Value is a missing type. Okay, it's probably still compiling. I don't know what's happening with my computer, but it's super slow today. So now we have the accept terms and conditions. So we have all the fields with a material look and feel. Okay. The next thing we need to do is to make the form look a bit nicer. So let's just do a few touches before we pass to validation. So The next thing we can do is to use, I think it's form group. It is form group. Let's see how it looks like inside a form group. Let's see. Let's put the others inside the form group and see. So the last thing I will say we need here is a few spaces between all the forms. So we can do that with a box, for example. I don't even know if it's the best approach, but it will work at least. So let's use a box. And in box, it receives, if I'm not mistaken, something called margin bottom. Okay, so let's put a box there and say margin bottom equals to 2. And by default, because I didn't change anything in material, every single of those units represents 8 pixels. Okay, so we put 2, it will represent 16. And now we have a nice space, so we can put this box in more places. I'm a machine of copy pasting today. So putting box, and it finishes here. We can give some spaces just to make it easier for our eyes. So this is what we have at the moment, and I see you soon for part number 3. In order to use validation in Formik, we have two different ways. The first way is for you to provide a validate function. And if you do that, you will have to do everything manually. For example, here we have a validation for an email field. And as you can see, it's quite big. And now start to think that you will have the validation for 3 or 5 or 6 different fields. It will become quite big, even if you start to make smaller functions for each specific functionality. It's quite hard, and for that reason, the Formik developers, they created what's called validationSchema. And validationSchema behind the scenes is just kind of an open door or an open window for you to start to use Yup. If we go to the Yup website, Yup is a really, really simple library for validation, at least in my opinion. I really, really like how simple it is for us to do things like a string to be required, or a string to be of type email, or a string to be of type URL. It's really, really easy. It even has validations for dates, for example, if you need to. So this is the preferred way that we are going to use Formik today for the validation. And so let's jump into VS Code and introduce the validation schema here. Okay. And in order for us to use the validation schema, we need to pass to this object what we know is the shape of our fields. Okay, the fields that we want to validate. If we don't want to validate a specific field, we don't even need to put it here. Okay, if you have like a free text that you don't care literally about that, you just don't put here in the object. Okay, so for us, the first field that we have is full name, and as you can see, VS Code already imported object from Yup. So we can start to use string. Okay, and we can import that because VS Code will probably not. So we have string required, and we can say that the minimum characters is 2. I guess it's what we put in our README, but it doesn't really matter because you can see exactly what's happening. Is we have a minimum of 2 characters, a maximum of 100 characters, and that field is required. Okay? So having a look into this, we can probably do quite easily the initial investment. It's a number, it's required, and we want at least 100 units of money. Okay, so it's quite easy. And before we go to the investment risk, because it's slightly different, the investment risk and the comment about investment risk, because one of them is an array of options, and the other one, which is the comment about investment risk, is only mandatory if investment risk is high. So let's do the dependence and the accepted terms first, because they are much, much easier. Then we go back to our browser to see how it's looking at the moment. And then we can come back to VS Code in order to finish those two that are a bit trickier. Okay, so let's do the dependence. The dependence is really similar to the initial investment. It's a number. We want it to be required, and it needs to be between 0 and 5 dependents. So quite easy as well, right? Then the accepted terms and conditions. It's kind of the same, but this time is a boolean. Okay, we want it to be required, even though we probably don't need to say required because it will be false by default, and we just want to have it as a true. But let's remove the required. Let's just say one of true. Okay, now let's import to up number. Oh, it's already there, and boolean. Okay, so we already have number and boolean imported. We can save these, and the last thing we will need before we go back to our browser is a way to show the errors, because at the moment if we go to our browser you will not see anything. So let's just grab those errors, go back to the end of our page, and let's say lowercase Bruno, lowercase pre, and we will say JSON dot, I could just have copy pasted, okay, null and for. So we have it now. Oops, I need to close the parentheses. I should have just copy pasted it. So we can just go now to our browser, go back to our application, and I think I have 3 R's. Good job, Bruno. And I don't have an R over there. Okay. In doubt, we can always come here, copy, paste, and save. Okay, going back to our page, you will see that by default we have no errors whatsoever. Okay, but if we start to touch every single field, now we have all the errors over here. Okay, because we interacted with the form already, so now we have errors. Okay, even though we are not showing the errors yet close to the field, we will do that after a bit. So for the moment, we can see all the errors of the fields that we already validated. We already have the full name saying, oh, full name is a required field. And this is another nice advantage of using up, is all these messages, as you can see, they come out of the box. Obviously, you can come here and give your own messages. For example, we can say required and say your name is mandatory, for example, and we put 3 exclamation marks for some reason. Going back to our browser, we can see that if we touch, we get out. Now it's our own validation, okay? So it's our own message for the validation. But to be honest, most of the messages that Yup provides to us are good enough, okay? So most of the times you probably will not need to be passing your own messages, even though you can, it's a possibility. Coming here, we can see that we already have those errors, and the only 2 fields that we have left are these 2. So the checkbox is when we click hi, we want this field to be mandatory. And at the moment we have no validation whatsoever for those 2. So let's start by the checkboxes. And the checkboxes will be slightly different than all of the ones that we already did, because the checkboxes, which is the investment risk, is an array. Okay, let's just make sure that we import it into Yup to avoid errors in the future. And this array is an array of strings. Okay, if this was an array of objects, okay, so if inside this array you had multiple objects, like 2 input fields instead of a checkbox, for example, you will pass, instead of a string, object, and then inside this object you will do what we did inside this object, so having your own fields. In our case, it's only a string, so let's rename this again to string, and we can even be specific and say one of high, medium, and low. Okay, so we want one of those, and we can say that the minimum amount of checkboxes clicked is 1. Okay, so here inside we are saying that it's an array of strings, and each string can only have one of those three values: high, medium, and low. And when we select those checkboxes, we need at least one selected. That's what we are saying in this line. Okay, so if we go back to our browser, I think I saved already. So if we go back to our browser, you will see that clicking in any field, leaving, now we have the investment risk. And in the investment risk, it says investment risk field must have at least one item. So if we select one item, now that error disappeared, which is exactly what we wanted. Let's just do a small trick here. So we are saying that we want one of high, medium, and low. So what happens if I come here and I say very low, for example, okay? If I say very low and we go back, you will see that now I have a new checkbox. But clicking there, look what happens. We have investment risk, and it says that the first position of our array, okay, which in this case is very low, and you can see here is the first position of our array, okay, that's why it's 0, must be one of the following values: high, medium, and low. And we are passing very low, so it's a no. It's a really useful feature and quite easy to do. If you do it manually with validate, is a bit harder, doable, but a bit harder. So the last field we have is probably the most complex of those. Let's make it. So in order to start this one we have mixed conditions here. We have a condition: if the checkbox high is selected, then the field is a string, required, it has min characters of 20 and max characters of 100. If the high checkbox is not selected, we have exactly the same validation, except that the field is not required. So if the user doesn't type anything, it's still a valid field. In order to do that, UP provides us with mixed, and mixed has a lot, it's already imported. Mixed has a lot of useful tips here. You can say a lot of things, but the one we are interested now is to say, okay, when this field, which is investment risk, and then we pass an object. This object has three things inside: his, which is the value. For now, let's leave it there. And when that value is true, so when that condition his happens, then we will pass this validation, which is string required, min of 20 and max of 100. Okay? Otherwise, so when that initial condition doesn't happen, we have a string of min 20, max 100. Okay? So the last bit we want here is, what is this his? Okay? You are probably tempted to say, okay, I do this, I go away, everything is fine. No, actually, it isn't fine, because this his will receive the value of that investment risk. Okay? And the value of that investment risk, and yes, VS Code is right, we are copying the wrong one, so it was already a replicated field. And what we are going to receive here will be an array of the options selected. For example, let's just refresh the page. It's not there yet, not saved. Probably now it will be there. Yes. So if you come here and if you see the values when we click here, in reality, this investment risk is an array. So when we are using is, we will receive that array. And in this case, we will receive an array with high and medium. So in reality, what we have to do is, this is a function, okay? So we can do the following. We will receive investment risk, which is an array. And this his supports both you passing a direct value, like a number or a string, or it passes you a function and you need to return true or false. Okay, so in this case, let's say that investment risk will be an array. So if you want, you can even say this string array, okay? And then what are you going to return? Oops, we can say investment risk dot find, because we want to find inside the array of the investment risks one that is high, right? If you don't understand what's in this line, we are literally going to every single position as soon as we find one that matches, and in our case the one that matches high. When that happens, find will return that element, and his only cares that that element is a truthy value. So if we are returning a string with some value, it will be a truthy value. So we will go to the first condition, the then. Okay? So going back to our browser, if we select medium, you see that the comment is not even here. But if we now select high, the comment about investment risk is here, saying that it is a required field. Okay, so you can say hello world, a lot of characters just to disappear. So now we have probably more than 20. So it disappeared the error. We can do this. We can come here, select one. We already select those, 125. The full name, again, my name. So everything looks fine. There is no errors whatsoever. So in order to then show the errors close to your fields, okay, you can come here and do the following. We already have errors, right? So we can also get something called touched. And touched let us know if that field was already touched or not. So if you already interacted with that field or not yet. And that's important. So let's use touched dot full name, okay? And if full name was touched, we want to check also if full name has errors. If yes, we will just say errors dot full name. Otherwise, we say no. So going back now to our component, you will see that the full name, now if we do just this, okay, and we leave the field, so we interacted with it and we left the field, okay, so after the first on blur, we will have the full name must be at least 2 characters. Oh, this is cool. So now we can start to type and do things like, and it starts to say and changes the messages and it's close to you. It's not here at the bottom. So we can do that for every single field we have. But this is hard to do, right? So the developers of Formik created something quite nice for us. So we can do just this full name here. And so with this, we can completely remove all of that. And this one is already taking care of untouched or not. So if your field was not touched yet, you will have no messages. If it was touched, you will have messages. Did we import it? Yes. I think we imported it to the wrong place. No, it's here. Okay. So you will have all the messages you want. So we can just do this, come here and say this one is the initial investment. Copy paste this one and this one just for fun. Let's make it here at the bottom and say that the name is investment risk. Let's copy again. Let's put it here. Comment about investment risk. Copy this one again, once more. And we copy this one, and probably this will be our last copy paste here. Okay, so let's just check if everything here makes sense. I think it does. Oh, we still have this touched. We can remove it. It's not being used anymore. Let's just see if all our values make sense. Yeah, this is we can start even with 0, this one. We don't have anything there. Comment about investment risk is empty. Dependent. Okay, okay. So we can go back here. Oh, we have still a warning. But that's a different one. That's the material drop down. Okay, let's go to the drop down. And literally it's complaining that we need a -1 because our default value is -1. So let's just pass a select for now. There are much better ways to solve this issue. So we have no errors there, which is good. Let's just see if when we submit, we have all these errors. So let's try something like ASD 1, 2, 3, 4, super risk value, copy paste, select zero dependence, depth. So we have nothing. So the last bit now that we need is our submit. And if you remember on, I think the first lesson, I told you that we will look into it after. And for now, we will not care about that bit, right? I said something like that. So now we can just receive values and a Formik helpers, okay? The values are the current values of your form. So let's pass values and console.log of helpers. Formik helpers, I think that's what I called it. Formik helpers. And just this just to differentiate every time we print it. So if we go back to our browser and we try to submit, we have all the errors. And one really nice feature, at least that I really like, is the fact that when you submit in Formik, if the form is not valid, nothing is going through your on submit. So your on submit is safe for you to put code directly. You don't need to do validation again in on submit. You just need to have your on submit, and you are sure that it will only be called when all your form is in a perfect state. Okay, so we can say, ooh, a lot of money now. Okay, comment. Let's put a comment up to 20 characters. Let's put saying that I have a dependent. And now when we submit, you will see that we have the full name over there. We have the initial investment. We have everything that we typed in our form. So this form is now ready for you to pick it up and send to your server or somewhere else you want to send your form. Okay? So this is a really, really easy way to do forms. The last bit that you probably want to know is while you are doing the post to your server, okay, or whatever method you are using for your server, when you are doing that, Formik has also a value here called is comma is submitting, okay, and this value is submitting is usually something that I use to disable my button, okay. So I usually come here and I say disabled is submitting. So now my button, while my form is submitting, is disabled. You just have one small trick for that one is when you are submitting something, you need to return a promise to Formik, okay. So for example, we can return new promise. We say the accept of the promise, okay, and we can do set timeout of ACC, and let's say 5 seconds is a good timeout, okay? Or let's even do this. Let's do this. Put this inside, okay, and after this we say ACC, okay. If I didn't do anything stupid, which seems I probably did because VS Code is complaining. Oh yes, VS Code, you have all the right to complain. Now it's fine. Okay, so now I'm returning a promise that will be resolved. Okay, I say ACC, I don't even know. Usually I call it resolved and rejected. I don't know why I call the ACC now. So now we are returning this promise, and this promise will be resolved after 5 seconds. So if we go back to our browser, and now we make the form valid again. Okay, let's make the form valid again. Let's just make a comment. Let's just select a dependent. And now you will see that my button is disabled for the next 5 seconds or whatever time your server takes to submit, okay? And now I have everything here. So when your server is submitting, you can use this this is submitting value. In order to disable your button, you can use it to disable some specific fields if you want to. You have a lot of properties here of everything that is happening. Another property is if something is validating. Okay, so while Formik is validating, if you have any async validators or something like that, or one of the validators you have is really slow, this is validating can be useful for you to not allow people to also submit your form. You can have something like this, for example. Where is it? It's here. Or is validating. Okay, so every time something is happening in your form, you can disable your submit button. It's usually a good practice for you to do. If you want, you can even make this a component of its own, so you don't need to put this in every single form. And the last bit that you can do, I will not do here, but that you can do is to pick up these fields and do something really similar to what we did with the checkboxes. And if you see the documentation from Formik, the second parameter, let's show you, the second parameter in the use field is a meta, and that meta will allow you to get the touched and the meta error. Okay, so with that, you can then come to the Material UI website, and in Material, your text field will receive an error and an helper text. Let me just confirm that. Components, just to not lie to you, but I think that's it. So error, yes, let's check. I think yes, it receives an error and an helper text. Okay, so if you pass to the component an helper text and an error, then everywhere you can just have my input field or my text field, whatever you want to call your input field. And every time you use it, you will have for free validation, you will have the messages for free. And so it's quite powerful what you can do on top of this small lesson that we got today. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you join me for the next ones, and see you roughly in a week's time. Bye bye.